On a quiet Sunday morning in 1995 inside a packed chapel in Compton, California, a soft hymn filled the air. And then, mid-verse, something unbelievable happened. A respected college teacher and her daughter, a bright university student, were sitting among the faithful. And by the time the final Amen echoed through the sanctuary, they were gone. 10 years later, an old wooden door in the choir loft creaked open, revealing something no one was prepared for. Sunday mornings in Compton, California, often began the same way. The sound of gospel melodies floating through the air, the slow, comforting creak of old church pews beneath parishioners, and the collective hush that settled as the choir began to sing. For Erin Burnett and her 21-year-old daughter, Kelly, this weekly ritual was more than just tradition. It was their anchor. Erin, a well-known college professor in the area, was admired not only for her intelligence, but for her quiet strength. Students often described her as the type of woman who could hold a classroom with nothing more than a glance. Sharp-minded, eloquent, and kind in a way that left a lasting mark, Erin was more than just a teacher. She was a mentor, a community figure, a mother. Kelly, on the other hand, was full of life and purpose. A university student with a future in journalism, she was bold, opinionated, and unafraid to speak truth to power. Together, they were not just close, they were inseparable. They lived in a small house tucked into a working-class neighborhood of Compton. Books lined their walls. Classical records shared space with stacks of investigative magazines. Their relationship was built on learning, on long discussions over coffee, and on standing by each other's side no matter what. That October morning in 1995 was unremarkable at first, a bit overcast, cool even for a California autumn. Erin and Kelly arrived at their local church, a modest, well-worn building that had stood for nearly a century. The paint on the wooden walls was starting to chip. The choir loft above creaked when you walked on it, and the stained glass windows often cast colorful light on the altar. Yet to the community, it was more than a building. It was home. The service had already begun when they walked in, slipping into their usual spot, 3 pews from the front. A few members of the congregation nodded at them in greeting. One elderly woman said she saw Kelly smile and whisper something to her mom before the hymn began. Erin had her hand on Kelly's shoulder, as she often did, a small gesture of reassurance, of motherly love. The choir, dressed in deep burgundy robes, launched into the fourth hymn. Abide with me, the room filled with harmony, with warmth, with the slow swell of voices reaching heavenward. Everyone sang, everyone prayed, and then something shifted. A few people would later say they noticed movement near the altar, a curtain gently swaying as if someone had brushed past it. One woman turned her head, thinking she saw a flicker of motion near the organ, but nothing seemed urgent. Nothing felt wrong. The music played on. It wasn't until the final hymn ended, the pastor gave his benediction, and the congregation began to file out that the silence started to feel unnatural. The pew where Erin and Kelly had sat was empty. Their coats were still there, neatly folded over the back of the bench. One of their hymn books had slid onto the floor, lying open on page 246. No one had seen them walk out. No doors had opened. No footsteps had echoed behind them. It was as if, in the middle of that sacred song, they had evaporated into the air. But this wasn't a magic act. It wasn't fiction. Erin Burnett and Kelly were real. They were loved. And they were gone. Panic didn't set in immediately. The church was large, with a few side rooms and storage closets. Perhaps they'd stepped out for a phone call or to help someone in need. Perhaps they'd gotten sick, or a family emergency had pulled them away. But by the time the choir had packed up their sheet music and the pastor locked the front doors, something felt undeniably wrong. Their car was still parked outside, keys still in the ignition, the engine cold. Inside their home later that evening, dinner ingredients remained untouched on the kitchen counter. Erin's lecture notes were still open on the dining table. Kelly's laptop was open to an unfinished assignment. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was disturbed. That was the last moment anyone could say they saw Erin Burnett and her daughter Kelly alive. Not on surveillance, not on nearby roads, not even walking down the sidewalk. No witness would come forward with a reliable sighting. No neighbor heard anything. And yet, the church had been full. The choir was singing. There were more than 80 people present. Somehow, among dozens of open eyes in a room built on faith and visibility, two women vanished in plain sight. Whispers began immediately. Some said it was an act of divine mystery. Others speculated more earthly, chilling possibilities. Abduction, foul play, a calculated escape. But those who knew Aaron and Kelly best never believed they walked away willingly. For 10 years, the pew they once sat in remained the same. The hymn book stayed on the floor longer than it should have, gathering dust. Some said they still felt a chill in the air when they walked past that row. The church tried to move on, with sermons, weddings, funerals. But the silence left behind by Aaron and Kelly never fully lifted. Then in 2005, during renovations of the church's upper structure, specifically the choir loft that had gone largely unused since the mid-90s, a hidden space was uncovered. Workers pried open a sealed wooden panel just above the sanctuary, and what they found would reopen wounds the town had tried so hard to heal. A faded sweater, a journal, a secret hidden in the ceiling above the very room where 80 voices had once sung in harmony. And suddenly the questions that haunted Compton for a decade no longer seemed so distant. Aaron and Kelly were no longer just missing. Their voices were finally returning, not in song but in story. Before the headlines, before the whispers, before the church became a mystery cloaked in hymnals and shadows, there was just Aaron and Kelly, two women, a mother and a daughter, living a life most would call ordinary. But those who knew them knew better. Their bond was powerful, magnetic, almost unbreakable. Erin Burnett was more than just a college professor. She was a force in the classroom, respected, admired, even quietly feared for her sharp mind. The type of teacher who didn't just hand out grades, but gave you questions that stayed with you for life. She taught English literature at a local community college just outside Compton. And if you'd ever taken her class, you remembered her. She wasn't flashy, she didn't need to be. She dressed modestly, spoke with calm authority, and had a gaze that could cut through pretense in seconds. Her students said she had a gift for unlocking thoughts you didn't know you had, for making Shakespeare feel like a protest anthem and turning poetry into a survival manual. But beyond the pages of books and lectures, Erin was known for something else, her love for her daughter. Kelly Burnett was 21 years old and already halfway to becoming the kind of journalist who didn't just write, she revealed. A student at a university not far from home, she was studying investigative journalism with a laser focus. Her dream? To become a truth teller. The kind who asked the hard questions, who spoke for the silenced. She interned part-time at a local paper. Even though she was still a student, she had already published 2 articles that made waves in her campus community, one about corruption in student housing and another questioning the school's financial ties to city developers. She didn't back down from controversy. She stepped into it. Friends called her fierce. Professors called her driven. But her mother simply called her my mirror. Their house in Compton wasn't large. A single-story white-paneled home with iron bars on the windows, like many others on the block. Inside, it felt different. Warm. Books filled every shelf, stacked in corners, sometimes even sitting in the kitchen, where they'd eat late dinners over cold tea and debate politics, philosophy, or the plot holes in classic novels. Aaron and Kelly had their differences. Of course they did. Kelly was bold where Aaron was careful. Kelly led with emotion where Aaron led with logic. But the respect they had for each other was undeniable. They were partners, teammates, each other's biggest defenders. Neighbors often saw them walking together in the evening, sometimes deep in conversation, sometimes just quiet, lost in thought. On Saturdays, they volunteered together, tutoring children, running workshops for young girls on literacy and public speaking. They believed in giving back, in using education as armor. And on Sundays, that was their sacred time. No matter how busy life got, no matter what deadlines loomed or what grading piles stacked up, Sunday mornings were non-negotiable. That's when they'd head to their local church, an old building at the corner of West Caldwell and Poinsettia. It had weathered time, like so many things in the neighborhood. Paint peeled from the eaves, and the steeple leaned slightly. But it stood. The congregation wasn't large, but it was tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone. You didn't walk through the front door without being greeted with hugs, handshakes, or someone pulling you into a pew beside them. Aaron and Kelly always sat in the third row, always together. To them, the church wasn't just about faith, it was about reflection, about grounding themselves. For Aaron, it was a place to put down the weight of the week, the grading, the meetings, the quiet pressure of holding everything together. For Kelly, it was a moment of pause before diving back into a world she planned to change. That October in 1995, things had been going well for both of them. Aaron had recently been asked to lead a new curriculum committee, a promotion in all but title. Her colleagues said she seemed proud, though typically quiet about her success. Kelly had just received a lead from one of her professors about a potential internship at a major news outlet in San Francisco. She hadn't told many people yet. Not even Aaron, some friends later said. She wanted it to be a surprise. What makes their story so haunting is that they weren't lost souls. They weren't struggling, wandering, or disconnected. They were solid, clear, focused. The kind of people no one expected to suddenly be missing. But here's the thing. In communities like Compton, where people look out for one another, where the sound of a gate creaking at the wrong time of night gets noticed, disappearances aren't just tragedies. They're breaches of trust. They're like a thread pulled from a tightly woven cloth, unraveling everything in quiet chaos. When Aaron and Kelly didn't come home that Sunday afternoon, the first to worry was Mrs. Lyle, their next-door neighbor. She noticed the porch light still on after sundown. She noticed the garbage hadn't been brought in. She waited until Monday morning before calling someone. By noon that day, Aaron hadn't shown up to her 10 a.m. class. Kelly's phone went unanswered. Something was off, but no one knew just how deeply off it was. People would later remember how normal everything seemed in the days leading up to their disappearance. Kelly was laughing at a coffee shop 2 days before. Aaron had been seen shopping for groceries on Friday night, carrying reusable bags and joking with the cashier. There were no cries for help, no warning signs, just stillness. A sudden silence in a household once so full of thought and sound. This isn't a story about strangers. It's not about people who drifted to the edges of society. It's about a mother and daughter who were present, visible, active in their world, which is exactly what made what happened next so chilling. It was supposed to be just another Sunday, but that morning the very air felt stiller than usual. No one noticed at the time. No one could have. But in hindsight, survivors of that day, the parishioners, the choir, even the pastor, say something in the room was off. Aaron and Kelly Burnett arrived just a few minutes late for the 10 a.m. service. It wasn't like them, but it wasn't unheard of either. Aaron, dressed in her usual gray slacks and navy blue cardigan, walked ahead while Kelly followed, carrying a notebook, something she often brought to jot down random thoughts, sermon ideas, or lyrics she liked. They slipped into the third pew from the front, their pew, the same one they'd sat in for years. An elderly woman named Gloria Martinez, seated behind them, remembered Aaron, gave a polite smile and whispered an apology for the late arrival. Kelly smiled too, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she nodded to someone across the aisle. The church was full. Around 80 members of the congregation were present. Families, older couples, young kids fidgeting in dress shoes. The choir, in deep burgundy robes, was positioned to the right of the pulpit, already mid-song when Aaron and Kelly sat down. At approximately 10:18 a.m., the fourth hymn began, "Abide with Me." It's a slow, haunting melody, one that builds gradually, resonating through the stained glass filtered light with a sense of surrender and peace. It was always a favorite of Aaron's. Gloria Martinez said she thought she heard Kelly humming softly along, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, about halfway through the hymn, something subtle happened. A quiet disturbance. A young choir member, 13-year-old Devin Ellis, later recalled that during the song, he noticed movement in the far left corner of the chapel, just behind the heavy velvet curtain that shielded the narrow passage to the church offices and the choir loft stairs. The curtain rustled. Not much, just a soft sway, enough to make Devin's eyes flick in that direction before returning to the sheet music in his hand. Others reported a faint creaking noise, like someone stepping on old wood. But the choir loft above hadn't been used in years, not since the new sound system was installed. The stairs leading up to it were behind a locked door, rarely touched. To most in the congregation, the moment passed without incident. The song continued. The pastor rose. The sermon began. An hour later, the final prayer was said, and the people slowly began to rise and greet each other. That's when someone noticed the coats. Aaron's coat, a gray wool blend with a red pen clipped to the lapel, was still resting on the back of the pew. Kelly's scarf was still draped neatly over the armrest. On the ground beneath their bench, a hymn book lay open, its pages slightly crumpled, as if dropped in a hurry. Gloria leaned forward and called their names softly. No response. She looked around, thinking perhaps they had stepped out for a moment, maybe to use the restroom or speak with someone near the altar. But no one had seen them walk away. The pastor, Reverend James Latham, dismissed the service and made his way to the pulpit exit. Gloria intercepted him. "Reverend," she said quietly, "Aaron and Kelly never left." It was brushed off at first. Maybe they'd slipped out a side door during the service. Maybe Kelly had gotten a phone call and Aaron had followed. But when the parking lot began to empty, and Aaron's 1990 Toyota Camry was still sitting in its usual spot, keys inside, windows rolled up, concern deepened. A few parishioners searched the church again, methodically this time. The women's restroom, empty. The back hallway, still quiet. The kitchen, the nursery, the pastor's office, nothing. The choir loft door was checked, but it was locked. It had been locked for years. No one had a reason to go up there, not since the old organ had been replaced and the choir had been moved down to the main floor. It didn't make sense. There were too many people in the building, too many eyes. The Burnett's couldn't have simply vanished. And yet, by 2 p.m., the church was empty, except for their coats, their car, and a sinking sense of dread. That night back at their home, things were just as they'd left them. A kettle sat on the stove, still full of water. 2 mugs were beside it, one with a lipstick stain, one with a tea bag steeped in cold water. Kelly's university backpack rested by the door, as if she had dropped it off before heading out. Aaron's lecture notes were still spread out on the dining table, with a red pen in the middle of grading a student essay. Nothing was disturbed, nothing stolen, no signs of forced entry, no struggle. The windows were locked, the back door was bolted, their beds were made, a roast chicken thawed in the fridge. The following day, when Aaron didn't show up for her 9:30 a.m. literature and identity course, something she had never missed, her department called the police. The initial response was procedural. A welfare check was performed. When both women were found absent from the home, workplace, and school, and their vehicle was untouched, a missing persons case was officially opened. Investigators began with the obvious. The church. They interviewed the congregation. They walked the building, top to bottom. Every room, every closet. The choir loft remained locked, but at the time, with no signs of tampering, it wasn't prioritized. Dogs were brought in. Nothing. The surrounding streets were canvassed. CCTV footage in the neighborhood, though limited in 1995, showed Aaron's car arriving but captured nothing after. Not a single frame of them leaving. Not by foot, not in another vehicle. For days, search parties combed nearby fields, alleys, construction zones. The LA River was scanned. Flyers went up across Compton and beyond. Reporters descended on the community, asking how 2 women could simply disappear. But that was the problem. They hadn't disappeared from an alley or empty parking lot. They hadn't vanished from a highway or an abandoned road. They had been sitting, singing, worshiping, in a room filled with nearly 100 people, and not one of those people could explain what happened. Theories began to spread. Within days, speculation grew. Some believed the 2 had run off, though those who knew Aaron and Kelly fiercely rejected that. There were no signs of financial withdrawal, no packed bags, no passports missing. Others whispered about cult involvement, that they had been lured into something dark. But nothing in their lives, nor in the church's teachings, suggested that was the case. Then there was a theory more unsettling, that someone in the church that morning had orchestrated their removal, that somewhere within that room full of friendly handshakes and familiar faces, a predator had been watching, waiting, planning. Still, no one had seen anything. No struggle, no scream, no rush. Just one moment they were there, the next they weren't. Why didn't anyone hear them leave? Why didn't anyone see them exit? How could two grown women vanish in a room full of witnesses? And what about the hymn book on the floor? Detectives began focusing on possible structural blind spots. Was there a tunnel under the church? Secret passageways? Hidden rooms? An inspection yielded no findings. The building was old but straightforward in design. The only area never fully explored, the sealed choir loft, was dismissed at the time due to its inaccessibility. Weeks turned into months. No calls, no ransom notes, no sightings, just silence. By Christmas of that year, the case had already begun to cool. The media had moved on, the flyers began to fade, the congregation returned to worship. But every Sunday, that third pew remained empty, and with it, a quiet fear that whoever had taken Aaron and Kelly might still be among them. The church kept going, but it never felt the same. And for Aaron's students, for Kelly's classmates, a gaping wound remained open. Two women, intelligent, compassionate, full of life, swallowed by something unseen, something silent, something that had crept in during a song meant to offer comfort, a hymn that ended without them. When the initial shock wore off, the case of Aaron and Kelly Burnett quickly became one of the most confounding investigations the Compton Police Department had ever handled. There were no signs of a break-in, no evidence of struggle, no screams, no blood, no witnesses, and yet they were gone. From a room filled with eyes, ears, and familiar voices, they vanished. The case was immediately assigned to Detective Marcus Hodge, a seasoned investigator who had handled dozens of disappearances, but none like this. From the beginning, he felt the weight of something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. I kept thinking, no way two people disappear in broad daylight inside a church full of people, and no one sees a damn thing, he later recalled in a 2007 documentary. That's not vanishing, that's precision. Hodge and his team began where all good detectives begin, with the last confirmed moment. The hymn had started at 10:18 a.m. By the end of the final chorus, the Burnetts were gone. Interviews were conducted with every member of the congregation, all 86 people. Not a single soul could recall seeing the Burnetts leave. A few remembered them sitting quietly. A couple said they looked tired, maybe distracted. One person claimed Kelly had dropped something under the pew and bent to retrieve it. But no one saw them stand up, walk out, or even whisper about stepping away. It's like the moment that song ended, they were erased, another parishioner told investigators. Attention soon turned inward. If they hadn't left the church, had something happened inside it? Detectives ordered a thorough re-examination of the building. It was a modest structure, built in the 1940s, retrofitted several times. Still, the layout was simple. One main sanctuary, a hallway with classrooms, a kitchen, a pastor's office, and the sealed choir loft. The choir loft door, locked since 1992 due to structural damage, was finally forced open. The staircase behind it was dusty, steep, and choked with cobwebs. Investigators climbed carefully, flashlights sweeping across peeling wallpaper and warped wooden steps. At the top, the small loft space looked untouched. No recent footprints, no fresh debris, just an old broken organ and the smell of mildew. Nothing. But one detail lingered. A patch of the wall near the loft railing had been recently scrubbed. Faint marks, the kind you only notice if you're looking for them, suggested someone had tried to wipe something away. Samples were taken, luminol was sprayed, traces of blood lit up. Now the question wasn't just how they vanished, it was, who knew that loft wasn't as sealed as everyone thought? Only a handful of people had access to keys for the old wing. Reverend Latham, the church janitor, and two long-serving deacons. All of them were questioned. All denied ever using the space in recent years. Reverend Latham was cooperative but visibly shaken. He claimed the loft was never opened. The janitor, Donnie Reeves, had been working at the church for 12 years. He was quiet, kept to himself. Said he hadn't entered the loft in over a decade. Detectives ran background checks. No criminal records, no red flags. But the janitor's answers felt rehearsed. He was asked to take a polygraph. He declined. When pressed, Donnie lawyered up and eventually quit his position at the church. No charges were filed, but suspicion hung in the air like incense smoke. Meanwhile, Erin's colleagues at the college were devastated. They described her as meticulous, punctual, and never someone to disappear without reason. Her planner, still left on her desk, showed her entire week scheduled to the minute. Meetings, lectures, office hours. Nothing unusual, no canceled classes, no strange notes. Kelly's professors described her as focused, fierce, and the kind of student you remember 10 years later. One professor revealed that just days before the disappearance, Kelly had told him she was working on something important, a possible expose related to city contracts and real estate deals in South LA. She hadn't gone into detail. Her dorm room was searched. Her laptop, old and slow, revealed several saved drafts of articles, none complete. One titled The Hollow Choir was a half-written Word document. It mentioned false promises, disguises, and one cryptic line that read, "Sometimes the pulpit hides the predator." What did it mean? Was it metaphorical? A piece of fiction she was drafting? Or something real? Investigators were never able to confirm. As days turned into weeks, Compton itself began to change. Whispers replaced worship. Eyes narrowed at neighbors. Trust cracked. The congregation split into factions, some believing something sinister had happened inside the church, others insisting Erin and Kelly had somehow orchestrated their own vanishing. Rumors swirled about secret affairs, cults, undercover work, even government involvement. Every day new theories, no evidence, and then nothing. 6 months in, the Burnett file was no closer to resolution. The blood found in the choir loft? Not enough for DNA analysis at the time. The people of interest? No arrests, no confessions, no further leads. Kelly's half-written document? Impossible to prove if it was tied to her disappearance. The case officially went cold in 1997. But not for everyone. Detective Hodge never stopped working the angles. He revisited witnesses. He re-interviewed choir members. He personally inspected the church 3 more times before retiring in 2003. In a recorded interview the year he left the force, he said, "There's something we missed, something small. They didn't just walk out. They were removed, silenced, hidden, and someone in that room knows how." October 15th, 2005. Exactly a decade to the day. The church on Spring Ridge Avenue was quieter now. Attendance had dwindled over the years. The once packed pews now sat half full on Sundays. A few original congregation members still came. Older now but faithful. For most, the memory of Erin and Kelly Burnett had settled into legend. An unsolved story that hung in the rafters like cobwebs. Revered, avoided, unspoken. But for Detective Marcus Hodge, retired for 2 years by then, the date still hit like a hammer. 10 years, no answers. 2 women, still gone. That morning he poured his coffee slowly, staring out at the hazy LA skyline from his apartment window, when something made him pick up the old file. Habit, guilt, maybe obsession. He thumbed through the same reports, same photographs, the old grainy shot of the church interior, the seating chart from that day. And then he saw it, a note he'd scribbled in 1995 but never followed up on. Unused maintenance access above choir loft, locked since '89. Architect report never filed. It had never been checked. The following week, Hodge drove to the church. He met with the new pastor, a young man unfamiliar with the case but open to helping. Together, they unlocked the rear stairwell and made their way up to the choir loft again, now even more decayed. But this time, Hodge was looking for something specific. He tapped along the back wall with the butt of a flashlight. Hollow, then solid, then thud, a different sound. They peeled back a loose wooden panel. Behind it was a narrow dust-choked crawl space, no more than 3 feet high, running the length of the loft. And at the far end, a black metal hatch, rusted, bolted shut, and covered in cobwebs. It took nearly 20 minutes to force it open. What lay beyond changed everything. The hatch led into a small storage area, a forgotten architectural cavity that had once been used to access the church's electrical system before renovations in the 80s. Roughly 6 feet by 8, cramped, silent, and inside were bones, partial skeletal remains. 2 sets, one larger, one smaller. Alongside them, scraps of cloth, a navy cardigan, a university logo patch, a rusted necklace with the letter K and a red pen. Detectives were called. The media swarmed. The remains were confirmed as Aaron and Kelly Burnett within days. 10 years of theories, all collapsed in a moment. They hadn't been taken out of the church. They had never left at all. They had died above the very people searching for them. The new questions, but the discovery, instead of ending the mystery, deepened it. How did they get into that crawl space? It wasn't accessible from inside the sanctuary. The maintenance hatch had been sealed for nearly 15 years at the time of their disappearance. The space had no ventilation, no natural light, and no exit route except back through the loft. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as asphyxiation due to oxygen deprivation. There were no signs of trauma, no drugs, no injuries. The position of the bodies, however, told a different story. They had been arranged, not sprawled, not panicked, laid side by side, Kelly's head resting against her mother's shoulder. It wasn't just death, it was a scene. A week after the remains were identified, the Compton Police Department received an unmarked envelope. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside, a single photo, black and white, grainy, dated October 1995. It showed the inside of the choir loft, the exact angle facing the crawl space wall. And in the corner of the image, a shadowed figure, half turned toward the camera, wearing what looked like a choir robe. On the back of the photo, scrawled in block letters, they were singing too loud. The image was authenticated. It hadn't been doctored. But how had someone taken it inside a locked space? Who sent it? Why now? And why that message? The deacon's confession. Following the photo, old suspects were re-interviewed. One in particular stood out. Deacon Harold Gates, a man in his late 70s by 2005, who had been one of the last people to see Aaron and Kelly alive. He had always claimed he left the sanctuary early that morning to check on the boiler downstairs, a routine he did every Sunday. But that detail had never fully checked out. Under renewed pressure and facing a mountain of evidence and years of guilt, Gates finally cracked. He admitted he had seen the 2 women slip toward the choir area during the hymn. Kelly had something in her hand, he said. A folder. She was upset. Aaron looked scared. They didn't want to be heard. Gates followed them, thinking they were about to confront someone, but he hadn't been the only one watching. According to Gates, someone had been using that maintenance space for years. Someone with a key, someone with control, someone who kept secrets there. He never said a name, just a chilling phrase. He said they were too loud, that the song wasn't for them, that they were going to ruin everything. Who he was, Gates never clarified. Days later, Gates died of a stroke. A church haunted. The discovery reopened not just the case, but the wounds in the community. The church immediately shut down the upper levels. Membership dropped. Old congregation members refused to return. The choir disbanded permanently. The pastor at the time held a service in honor of Aaron and Kelly. The pew they once sat in was draped in white silk, with their hymn books placed side by side. During that service, someone left an old cassette tape on the pulpit. No label, no markings. When played, it was a recording. The last hymn sung that morning in 1995. Midway through the song, faintly in the background, 2 voices begin whispering. One says, "Are you sure?" The other responds, "They need to know." Then, silence. Then, a door creaks, footsteps, a long exhale, and the tape cuts. In the weeks following the grim discovery and the chilling cassette tape, The Compton Police Department quietly reopened the Burnett case, not for public show, but in pursuit of some sliver of truth they had missed. But the years had stolen evidence, buried leads, and scattered the lives of witnesses like leaves in the wind. Technology had evolved, but time had diluted the case's urgency. The community, once riveted by the mystery, now hesitated to reopen old wounds. Still, Detective Marcus Hodge, though technically retired, was unofficially consulted once again. He returned to the church one final time, walking through the main aisle slowly, his steps echoing beneath the high ceiling that had once hidden death in silence. He stood in the exact pew where Aaron and Kelly last sat, closed his eyes and listened to nothing. But the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with memory. From there, the final pieces began to fall into place. A forensic reanalysis of the church blueprints, using updated scanning tools, revealed a network of air ducts and small architectural voids that connected the sanctuary, choir loft, and hidden crawl space. Designed originally for maintenance but long forgotten. Someone familiar with the building could have moved between them unseen. Combined with the recovered blood evidence, old camera footage from the day of the service, previously believed lost, was pulled from backup reels stored in the basement of a local news affiliate. Most of it showed nothing unusual, but one frame, just seconds before the hymn ended, revealed a figure near the far left wall of the sanctuary, an area thought to have been unoccupied. Zooming in, facial features were indistinct, but a detail stood out, a church key lanyard hanging from the figure's neck. That lanyard had only been issued to 3 people, all accounted for, except one, the former church janitor, Donnie Reeves. Now long gone, Donnie had moved to Arizona in 1998, where he lived under a different name. After several legal battles, a warrant was granted to search his property. Hidden in his garage inside a locked wooden chest were a series of notebooks. In them were deeply disturbed journal entries, cryptic references to silencing the wicked and keeping God's house clean. One passage mentioned the girl with the folder, and another, more unsettling, described the joy of hearing them fade away like smoke. There was also a newspaper clipping of Aaron and Kelly's faces, cut out, taped inside the back cover. It was enough to confirm what the police already suspected. Donnie had been in the church that day. He knew the space. He knew the choir loft. And most importantly, he knew how to hide. When approached, he refused to speak. No confession ever came. He was declared mentally unfit to stand trial and institutionalized. The system never got its court date, but unofficially the case was closed. The church was permanently shuttered by 2006. The building stood abandoned for 2 years before being demolished quietly, without ceremony. In its place now stands a community garden, maintained by local college students, with a small plaque beneath an olive tree that simply reads, "For Aaron and Kelly. For truth, no matter the cost." The Burnett's story, once buried, began to re-emerge, no longer as a ghost story, but as a warning. A case study in what it means to be overlooked, unheard, and silenced in plain sight. In the years that followed, Kelly's half-written exposé, The Hollow Choir, was recovered and completed posthumously by her favorite professor, with her name placed on the byline. It went on to win several awards. Aaron's former students started a scholarship in her name for women pursuing education and social justice. Both women, once lost in mystery, were finally honored in purpose. But for Marcus Hodge, no ending felt clean. He still dreams of that choir loft, still hears the final notes of that hymn in the dark quiet of early mornings. He once said in an interview, "It wasn't the way they died that haunted me. It was the way they were ignored before they did." And perhaps that's the real resolution, not in arrests or courtrooms, but in what we choose to see, who we choose to hear, and the hidden cost of staying silent when someone is singing for help. Because sometimes the loudest screams are the ones buried under the softest songs, and the real mystery is why no one ever stops the music long enough to listen. Years passed, but the name Burnett never left the town's collective memory. Though Compton had seen its share of headlines and heartache, the quiet tragedy of Aaron and Kelly settled like a shadow over the community. Never loud, never violent, just unresolved pain whispered between hymns, sermons, and old church walls now long gone. After the church was torn down and the garden planted, People said the neighborhood felt lighter. Whether it was symbolism or simple relief, something about seeing flowers bloom where secrets once festered gave closure to a few who needed it most. Kelly's classmates at the university organized an annual lecture in her honor, focused on speaking truth in institutions that would rather you stay quiet. Her article, The Hollow Choir, became required reading in journalism ethics classes across California. She was posthumously awarded a Civic Journalism Medal. Erin, remembered as kind but brave, had a quiet legacy that grew louder over time. A group of her former students, now teachers themselves, started the Burnett Project, which helps women in vulnerable communities finish their education. One student recalled how Erin once said, "Teaching is just loving loudly," and now that quote is etched on the wall of the project's learning center. But closure isn't the same as healing. Some wounds don't vanish. They fade like chalk after rain. Detective Marcus Hodge passed away 3 years after the case was closed. His daughter said he kept a small photo of Erin and Kelly in his wallet until the day he died. He never stopped looking, she said, even after he found them. As for Donnie Reeves, the man believed to be responsible, he died in a state psychiatric hospital in 2011. No family claimed the body. His notebooks were sealed away, and his name rarely appears in media coverage. The story, as the community tells it, isn't about him. It's about two women who walked into a church, trying to do the right thing, and were never seen again. Yet every October on the anniversary, someone still leaves a single white rose on the gate of where the church once stood. No note, no name, just a rose, as if to say, we remember. We listened. We finally heard the last note of their song, and maybe that's the message that lingers long after the investigation ends. After the headlines fade, after the mystery is solved, but never quite forgotten. When voices are lost in the music, it's not enough to mourn them. We have to carry their message forward. Because Erin and Kelly weren't just victims of a crime. They were echoes asking us to stop and listen. And now finally we do.